Tired of doing this show with you. Hey, what's up, everybody? What's up, Joel C. Cordes? Welcome into the program, and it's your program too. And I am blessed to be able to do this show with you. It's basketball by association. Joel, non-begrudgingly, hello.
Happy Valentine's Day to all of our listeners out there. If you are just realizing that it is Valentine's Day by the time that you hear this, you have failed miserably and are in big, big trouble. Yeah. Don't bother turning off the show. It doesn't matter at this point. You're screwed. So
yeah, at the earliest, you're probably hearing this at 5 Central Time, so it's over. It's over. You've lost. But that's okay.
There's always next year with someone else, I'm sure.
Joel, I owe you an apology. I was trying all weekend to try to get this podcast recorded with you to try to get up hot on the trade talk, because there was a wow one that we were talking about last week, wondering if we would get that.
There was a couple, yeah.
Yeah, well, there was one big wow one,
right?
Particularly. One joke I didn't like from, I believe it was, I think it was Adria Wojnarowski, who had tweeted like right as the deadline was approaching, no deals for the Knicks today. And I was like, why'd you have to, you didn't have to say it like that. Like, that was a little, like, I felt like you were being kind of a saucy lady with that. But anyway,
well.
I had the baby duty all weekend by myself, and I tried, because I was fired up. I was ready to talk about, especially the one big hot number that's in there. Also, some quiet numbers in there too. But let's just start unpacking. All right, Joel.
First, we got to name the episode, though, don't we?
This is much. Let me get to the transition. I would love, by the way, to start unpacking this thing. But here's the thing: like, there's still some tape on the box. And to open the box, we got to rip the tape off. And the tape is the name of the show.
All right. Fair enough.
All right.
And the fact that a few of these guys that we're going to talk about have not played, so we don't have an early returns, but a few deals we do.
It's so weird that this, like, it's Monday. Like, the trade deadline was Thursday afternoon.
Before we name the episode, were you more surprised, and we can talk about this later if you want, were you more surprised that the Knicks, the Lakers, the Hawks, or there was one other team, who was it? Somebody else that badly needed to make a deal and did not. Lakers, Knicks, Hawks, or the Bulls did not make a trade at the deadline, because every single one of those teams were ones that we were like, you probably should do something. And the Knicks, there was a lot of smoke that they might do something. So
it's the Lakers for me. Yeah, it's clearly the Lakers. Especially when you sort of saw the comments from, I think it was LeBron on Wednesday night, when, like, he was right next to Anthony Davis. Was that the night that they got smoked by Milwaukee?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, when they got smoked by Milwaukee, and a reporter was like, hey, so what's a game like this sort of show you about this team? And he was like, what do you want me to say? That we're not in their league? Like, we're not. It's like, yeah, we can't handle them. It's like, all right, brother. All right. So based off of all of that, and a lot of the drama and sort of outspoken drama for people associated with the team, the fact that nothing happened told me one thing: they couldn't get anything done, because there's no way they didn't try their darndest to try to get something done.
That's almost more deflating, right, than if the wrong guy had gotten moved. We'll talk about all that coming up in just a second. This is episode 95 of Basketball by Association. Check us out on YouTube, where you should like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for the video version of the show. Audio only is Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts. Arky, Shea, there are only two players in NBA history who have ever worn 95, and both of them are currently in the league right now, which is kind of an interesting tidbit. One of them is DeAndre Bembry, who has bounced around a little bit, played for the Grizzlies, the Hawks. He is currently on the Nets. I got no problem with DeAndre Bembry, but the other guy who currently wears 95 is actually a personal favorite of mine, just because he is one of those guys who has had to claw and scrape and grind his way into the league. And basically from the moment that he got brought in, he was doing notably helpful things for a team that badly needed his presence. And he has been cut twice, or at least waived twice, by said team, yet kept in their organization and brought back yet again. And currently He is a former starter, but currently is in the rotation and is still an important player. And he's on the Golden State Warriors. I don't know if you want to take a stab. It's a newer guy. He's only been in the league 3 seasons.
I don't know. Who's 95 on the Warriors right now?
95 is Juan Toscano Anderson, and I feel like
shut up. Yeah,
he's one of those guys who doesn't get his due for coming undrafted into the league, carving out a role for himself, carving out a contract despite getting cut multiple times, being in the G League, and will probably have a 10-year NBA career, and never flashy, but has just, again, filled that role when needed. And it's a guy like that who I'm really happy to name an episode after, because they don't get their due when they should. So JTA, this one's for you, buddy.
JTA, as in you're not going to pronounce his name again? Is that what just happened?
Well, Juan Toscano Anderson, that's what the announcers on the Dubs broadcast too. It's a lot of JTA. So
yeah, there's a player, I think it's from the Senegal or the Congo, I think, for Baylor, whose name is like Chamwa Chamwa. It's Chamwa Chachowa, something like that. But it's a really he's a really good player. He just got hurt over the weekend. But it's another one of those, you start reading the name, you're like, what? In fact, I might try to just find that.
I mean, in JTA's case, it's all easy enough to pronounce. It's just the longer name. So you only got so much time in the broadcast, and 2 years at Marquette for JTA and 3 years on the Golden State Warriors. He played 55 games in 55 games so far this season, 53 last year and 13 during the bubble season.
He's Jonathan Chamwa Chachua.
Okay.
No, Chachua,
probably, yeah.
Chachua. He's from Cameroon.
Okay.
So that's anyway. So shout out not to him because it's not his episode. Maybe one day he'll get his own episode.
Yeah.
But right now it's I've already forgotten what the Golden State Warriors player that we TKA, no, JTA.
There you go. JTA.
All right, so let's get to it. James Harden is no longer a net in the wild trade of the trade deadline. Happened pretty early on in the trade deadline day of Thursday. So we had
He's no longer a net in the most literal sense of the term. Metaphorically speaking, he was no longer a net perhaps 2 weeks ago, right?
Apparently so. He is allegedly now going to become a Philadelphia 76er because as of the last time I was paying attention, he still wasn't even in Philadelphia. So
he did land. He shook Daryl Morey's hand. I saw it on the interweb, so it must be true.
So Ben Simmons is amongst the pieces that are going back in the trade. Those are the two big pieces. We can break down the totality of the trade in just a second. But when you saw that this trade was going down and it was official, and we had poo-pooed it on the show, we're like, why would you do this if you're the Nets? Like, why? Like, this is the year all three of you can get some time together. I mean, the stat has been blown up all over the place since. They played 16 games together.
Yep. 10 during the regular season, 6 during the postseason.
And looked great.
13-3 during those 16 games.
Looked phenomenal, yet no. So, Joe, when you saw that this trade actually was going through and was happening, big ramifications there for both teams. What'd you think?
First and foremost, we all lost a lot of respect for Ben Simmons a long time ago. For James Harden, there was a massive loss of respect when he sulked /partied /fatted his way out of Houston to get to Brooklyn. But by the time he got to the Nets, he put together some really good tape for them, especially when they were in trouble last year. He kind of carried things along. He fit in well enough with Kevin Durant. And yet now all that respect and goodwill that may have been there is gone because he pulled the exact same crap to get out of Brooklyn, a place that he had forced his way to play with his best buddies. And the major concern here is not just, okay, maybe two's company, three's a crowd. Maybe he wanted to play with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving is in that mix and he's not getting along with Kyrie. There's a lot of different reports there that they weren't seeing eye to eye. And you know what? James Harden is not going to be the first guy or the last that didn't get along with Kyrie or thought that Kyrie was a little weird or that hey, he's not holding up his end of the bargain for the team. I get that. But did things get so bad that you needed to leave this place that you cherry picked to go? And the fact that you're willing to just force that hand in the middle of this season after all this team has been through, in the middle of a 10-game losing streak, when KD is hurt, and to not give it any more time, just, it smacks of an entitledness that is Ben Simmons-esque. Like, it's beyond a Kyrie Irving-esque, which, yes, is entitled, but at least has some principle behind it. Like, you can disagree with the principle all you want, but at least Kyrie has been like, nah, man, this is why I'm doing it, and you can hate me if you want, and I'm willing to take that. And as much as we might disagree with the methodology or even the principle, like, you know who Kyrie is. And Harden at this point is just, it's like a different level of infant, is what it sure seems like. And here's a guy who did not get along with Dwight Howard, did not get along with Chris Paul, allegedly did not get along with Russell Westbrook, his former Thunder teammate and buddy. Now we don't know whether he got along with Durant. Obviously, it wasn't enough to stay there and help him out, and he certainly didn't get along with Kyrie. And you are sending that guy to the Philadelphia 76ers, who are looking to win a championship, and it is clearly Joel Embiid's team, and it will be Joel Embiid's team. And you're telling me that James Harden long-term is going to have a fine time playing second fiddle there just because Daryl Morey is there? I am not the first or the 1,000th guy to say this over the last couple days, but we're all thinking it. We're all saying it. It is going to be an enormous surprise and a career-turning and career-saving surprise if James Harden can prove otherwise with this. But this is the beginning of the end otherwise. This is the beginning of a 1.5-year experiment in Philadelphia that otherwise goes south, likely tanks the Sixers' ability to chase that championship, creates that rift that requires some blowing up, and is probably the beginning of a steep decline and that career cratering for James Harden, the way that we've already seen Russell Westbrook happen. And Westbrook, to his credit, while abrasive and while proud and maybe difficult to like get him to change what he does, Westbrook has not been a little baby infant at any point of this. And Harden has been. Like, it's a scary cratering if it's going to happen upstairs. And Harden is an upstairs thing.
So, from a personal level, I'll start with, I'm disappointed in James Harden. He's the guy I've defended on this show. I really sort of liked as a teammate for a long time, being deferential on the court.
He's done a lot of good things.
He has been someone that I felt like, as far as the superstars, I could, root for as a personality, and also think that, he has the best interest of his team at heart. But if you start looking at the recent moves he's sort of made, and the old adage is true, actions speak louder than words. I mean, the morning of that trade, or maybe it was the morning before, a story came out that James Harden didn't want this trade request to go public because he didn't want the backlash. The trade request is going to get out there, right? Like, so if you go as quietly as you want, if you send a carrier pigeon for some reason, and that's how you get your trade request, someone's going to find that piece of paper off that bird's leg.
Because it's been out there for months.
Exactly.
And it was a dead letter thing until something changed, right? Yeah. Suddenly there was an impetus for the Sixers to go, or for the Nets to go, we should revisit this. And we have a reason, an impetus to make this trade, whereas before we were not.
Well, here's also the thing. Like, then you start reading the stories the last couple of weeks, his, I'm air quoting if you can't see the video version, his injuries have been sort of acting up. A little bit of a shoulder issue, a hamstring issue, like just, knick-knack things that are going to, just keep you out of the game for a few of those. And he starts thinking, in the middle of the season, when your team is struggling, like, they hit a lull quite obviously because the best player on the planet is hurt.
Yep.
The guy that carried that team. That team was number 1 in the East with Kevin Durant and James Harden. They were the first place team.
And now is down in the play-in field and is in danger of missing the playoffs if this goes much longer.
And that's the point where, like, I guess you sort of say, hey, Kyrie's in and out a little bit. He's not going to affect you a whole bunch. But Kevin Durant, like, James Harden apparently just saw that without KD, like, this is going to be super hard. And so James Harden's not a young kid.
Nope.
James Harden was ring chasing when he went to Brooklyn to go play with his buds too. Philadelphia is the best equipped team right now in the East of those two, I should say, to be able to win that championship now. So he shot his way out of town. He shot his way out of town again. And that's what's so frustrating to me about the whole scenario is that for a guy who I started rooting for when he was OKC and in Houston when they had their runs going to Game 7, and he had poor performances, but he was Houston.
Yeah.
And then for him to go to Brooklyn, and again to get like almost no time with both of those two guys, he sees the ships a sinking a little bit. Kevin Durant's going to be back in a few weeks, hopefully, and you can start getting the momentum back, and you're just going to bail. You're just going to bail on the team because it looks like it's getting hard. Listen, like, he's going to be super expensive in about a year and a half, right? Like there's a chance in like 3 years he's going to be owed like $60 million or something to play on a team. He's almost done. But like, just financially, no one's going to be able to support paying that much for that kind of guy at that age. So I get the urgency to want to try to get on the best boat possible if the ship is sinking after hitting the Titanic. But Kevin Durant's coming back, and Kyrie Irving's still on the team. And unless you just hate Kyrie all of a sudden, there was a story coming out that like he got a little weirded out when like he started to smudge the locker room. Kyrie was one time he was burning some sage. And it's like, oh, okay, but that probably wasn't the first time he tried to smudge the locker room. Right. And I think that was when they went to Cleveland, because, bad times in the locker room in Cleveland. He doesn't have great memories of Cleveland, but he doesn't do that every game. And even so, he's the weirdest player you ever played with.
Right. Get over it. So he's weird,
yeah, okay. Like, he's one of the best players on the planet. Like, when you're able to have,
I mean,
Kyrie. Well, yeah. Kyrie's one of the best players. Like, he is the best ball handler. He's the best scoring point guard. I think
I don't think best scoring point guard anymore. That's Steph or Ja or whoever. Like, that's past Kyrie by. The ball handling skills. I feel
like there's a lot that we lose by not being able to see Kyrie because like he doesn't get to,
I love watching Kyrie Irving play. So you're preaching to the choir on that. I just, like, as far as ranking goes.
Okay, how about this?
It's been a while. You're right.
He's in the ballpark. He is very close to the top. Like, he's not 30th on the list. Right. He's not 10th on the list. Yeah. You can think of maybe 2 guys ahead of him, probably tops right now. Anyway, like, to shoot your way out of town because things are a little tough right now when when everyone's back healthy and able to play together, probably still is your best chance to win it, win a title in the East. I don't know, man. Like, it stinks to me. It stinks for someone who I really wanted to root for. And that being aside, let's move the conversation forward. Is Philadelphia the favorite in the East now?
No. And I don't understand why Philadelphia made this move. We talked about this before. The trade deadline. I would have traded Ben Simmons for a lesser player. I understand James Harden is a Hall of Famer. And so at the end of the day, you can go, yep, we had that number 1 pick. He didn't work out. We moved him and got a Hall of Famer back. It's a Daryl Morey guy. I get that. It's saving face. I would have rather traded Ben Simmons for a lesser player or 2 lesser players who actually fit what I was doing. I don't understand the trade for Harden, but straight up Simmons for Harden, you could have talked me into. I understand the dollars may not have worked. I do not, for the life of me, understand why the Sixers got duped into also giving up Seth Curry, who I know is in a massive shooting slump. Andre Drummond.
The next piece, that they gave up more than just the 1-for-1.
Andre Drummond is your Joel Embiid insurance policy, a guy who has struggled with his health, Drummond has played very, very well plugging that gap. I know he's not going to be there long term because he wants a starting job and he's proving that he can do a starting job. He played that way in LA last year as well, did Drummond, although it was a lot less time. But like Drummond has had a great year. And to move on from those two guys, yes, you bring in James Harden. He's a Hall of Famer. He's going to put up decent numbers. But you have Tyrese Maxey and Shake Milton, guys who are very talented, up-and-coming guards who play downhill with the ball in their hands. They are not off-the-ball players. They are not catch-and-shoot guys. They can slash a little bit. James Harden, while he can shoot off the ball, primarily has the ball in his hands as both a distributor and a scorer. I am not concerned about the James Harden-Joel Embiid pairing. That'll work itself out. But in bringing James Harden in, you got rid of two of your most helpful rotation guys, and you neutralized two of your other key rotation guys who now go from very good specialists to replacement level players, slightly above average athletic players who are going to be asked to change their game. That does not make sense to me. Philadelphia overpaid to get a potential headache nightmare that destroys this experiment, like you and I have said, in a year and a half. That's scary.
Now, obviously, okay, so James Harden, if you don't know, did opt in for next season, so yeah, he's in for the next year because he had the player option. But for this final 3-4 months of the season, like if they get through to June and play to the end of June for a chance for the championship, can you see it short term working out? Like if you're Philadelphia. And you're dead set, you're going to make this move. You're going to go Ben Simmons, James Harden, and you got to give up a couple more pieces, or you're not going to get the deal to happen. If you're Philadelphia, you've had to feel like your window is now with Joel Embiid, right? So like, if Daryl Morey talks to Doc Rivers and they both say this guy can put us over the top, and Seth Curry's a great shooter, and Andre Drummond's a great insurance piece. But to make a little bit of the money work, like and to get this deal done, this is our shot to win the championship. Wouldn't you then still make that move? Because it's so hard. Philadelphia, we loved them last year, didn't get to the NBA Finals. We liked them. I liked them the year before, not the NBA Finals. It feels the way Joel Embiid is playing right now, and the team overall is playing right now. This is their shot. This is their year, and if you make a bad decision for a 1-year shot at the championship, I can see how your Daryl Morey and your Doc Rivers, you say, I don't want to, but like, this is our shot at the ship.
They've been in the hunt the last couple of years.
This is what the process has been building for to get to the Larry O'Brien. This is probably. I don't know if it's the best, but if they think it's the best.
They've been in the hunt the last couple of years with Ben Simmons. They've been in the hunt this year without Ben Simmons. And yes, you maybe I think it's only marginally improved your window short term. I agree that it probably is a little further open because superstars do make a difference in the playoffs. They just flat out do. But there's not a lot of time for Harden and Embiid to coalesce. We know Embiid's going to want the ball. We know he's the loudest voice in the locker room. Harden's just going to have to deal with that. And we've seen how well he just deals with things, especially when it comes to teammates. But then I feel like you shorten the window overall because of the looming James Harden issue, whether it comes with the contract or whether it comes with how well he's going to play nicely with Joel Embiid, what his mental state is like. I mean, I'm going to go on record and say, I know that there weren't maybe a lot of other superstars at the level of Harden that were available. And certainly there were few teams that might have been willing to take Ben Simmons and get it. But I would have rather, if I was Philly, have taken Tyrese Halliburton and like Harrison Barnes from the Sacramento Kings if that was available. I know that the Sixers, or we assume that the Sixers were asking for De'Aaron Fox, and that's why the Kings deal wasn't going to go. But if the Kings were going to get rid of Halliburton, who I'm going to backhand compliment later on when we talk about the Pacers, and if I could have gotten him and another usable piece, I think that moves the needle more long-term and short-term than Harden.
And you can also say that Harden, superstars make a big difference in the playoffs, but James Harden probably more than most superstars of this modern time that we talk about, and we put Harden there, and contractually speaking, at the very least, he is.
And the fact is, won an MVP, and the stats are there.
Yeah.
But yeah,
he's come up quiet in some big moments, in some big
Mhm.
games, and if you want to make that trade, you say, all right, this guy might put us over the top, but you look at some of the important playoff clinching games, the potential winning series games. He's struggled big time. I mean, I still got the vision of his head of him looking for this mouthpiece on the floor in Houston.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I mean, there's some tough times.
I want to surround Joel Embiid with right-way players. Ben Simmons turned out to not be a right-way player, and it was a nightmare. Why are we repeating that with James Harden, who has proven, unfortunately, enough times for it to be rather definitive? And it's not that he can't change our impression or whatever, but he's proven rather definitively that he's not a right-way player. That's all there is to it. And from the Nets side, we've talked about them from adding Ben Simmons, like, okay, defensively, that's an upgrade. Putting him on the front line with Kevin Durant, really interesting. You could even play Ben Simmons at small ball 5 a little bit. Really interesting. Adding Seth Curry means that they've got Curry and Patty Mills and Joe Harris when it comes back. And that's a really interesting trio of shooters to put around Durant, one of the all-time outside shooters, and Kyrie Irving, who is a very, very solid catch and shoot, three-point guy in his own right. So you stretch things. Adding Andre Drummond in there is really interesting because Drummond has done some yeoman's work. When Joel Embiid has been hurt, it means fewer minutes for LaMarcus Aldridge, which slots him back to doing, I think, more within his wheelhouse. You reunite Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin, who, when they weren't hurt in Detroit, actually had some really good chemistry as Pistons. And Blake Griffin could use that shot in the arm to maybe get anything out of him. So there's a lot of pluses here. I don't know, outside of getting James Harden out the door, and maybe Ben Simmons comes in and has learned a thing or two. I highly doubt it, but maybe he's come in and he fits in nicely because he's hungry to prove that he's not a bust, that he's not a head case, and just that change of scenery is helpful. But it sure seems like Brooklyn has had some dysfunction problems in that locker room, right? So adding Ben Simmons into that, it's questionable. I don't love this for the Nets, but I like it a lot more when they don't just get Ben Simmons. The fact that they got Seth Curry and Andre Drummond on top of this means that regardless of what Simmons does, KD, when he returns, theoretically has more help. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah, I also struggle with, if I want a guy to lead my team while Kevin Durant's out or Kyrie's not able to be on the court for road games or home games, I should say. Is Ben Simmons the big number 2 I want? Like that. That's something I struggle with if I'm making it. If I'm making the decision for the Nets, this would be something obviously I would have talked about 1,000 times before we made the deal. Listen, we clearly can't have all 3 of our pieces at the same time, regardless of injury. So if we got Kevin Durant coming back at some point, Kyrie Irving's available for road games, I gotta have a third, at least one guy to lead me for a little bit. Is my number 2 going to be Ben Simmons?
Here's where I'll answer that to the positive. To Ben Simmons' credit, Joel Embiid was hurt a bunch during Simmons' tenure in Philly. So he did play as the lead guy, whether Tobias Harris was in that mix or not, and did relatively well. And when Kyrie is missing games, whether due to injury or due to the vaccination rules, Ben Simmons becomes the lead ball handler, which is where he is most comfortable, and he'll be the table setter for a lot of guys. He is a very, very good defender and one of the best in the league at turning a defensive play into quick offense and getting people out on the run. The bigger question for me is, what do you do when Kyrie comes back? Does Kyrie become that lead ball handler? Does Ben Simmons, we know he doesn't play well off the ball because he can't shoot, but does it become more of just a guy with the second unit, somebody who is there to push the pace and maybe be your lead defender and kind of, morph into the background a little bit more? I don't know. And that's going to be something that has to be sussed out. And again, where is Ben Simmons in the head? Is he going to accept the fact that you are the third wheel And on a lot of nights, you might be the fifth wheel offensively, depending on what's out there and how it's going. And yet you're going to have to get over that if that's a problem, because there's going to be a lot of nights where you're the number one guy who's table setting for everybody else. It's going to be a lot of changes. And again, the Nets are a team that are built to try to win a championship this year, despite these struggles.
Like their window is right now, like the Sixers is right now. Like it's like now, like it's literally right now. I'm interested. Did you happen to see the selection show for the All-Star team LeBron and team KD? Like, how great was that moment where it was Rudy Gobert and James Harden for the last pick, and Kevin Durant has to pick one of the two, and he's out there saying, I need size. I need size. I'm gonna have to go with Rudy Gobert, and LeBron James is hiding his face behind a clipboard, and everybody in the studio is laughing because they all know. And Kevin Durant, you knew, like, he didn't want to be put in that spot. And he did. And it was finally good that Barkley got the end. Like, he's going to be playing as soon as he gets back over to Philly. He's going to put some icy hot on them. Like, he'll be ready.
And yet he's not. This is what's interesting. Now the hamstring hurts enough that Harden is not going to play until the All-Star break. Will he play in the All-Star game, or will he sit out the All-Star game because his feelings are hurt, and then we'll come back and play later? I'm guessing he does not play in the All-Star game.
Yeah, I mean, we're two more games before the All-Star break.
I'm guessing he doesn't, because it's too much of an indignity for him to have been picked last, and so somebody else will get that nod. Anthony Edwards from the Timberwolves deserves it, by the way.
Where's that? Cleveland this year? Is it Cleveland right now?
That's a good question.
I think it's in Cleveland, but not the biggest of deal. All right, Joe, you texted me like during the trade deadline and said there were a lot of these trades where, like, we did our trade simulation a couple of weeks ago, things that you thought would help make teams better. And Joel, shockingly, none of them happened. None of them
Most
happened.
of the guys that we pegged to get traded did get traded, just but not to where we thought.
Right. Not the way we wanted to sort of see them get traded, especially to my New York Knicks team. But don't worry about it. They'll figure it out after blowing like a 25-point lead to Portland. That's good. Anyway,
I hear Tom Thibodeau's good at adjusting, so I'm sure they'll make some changes. And
okay, so what was the biggest thing then in that case that stood out to you as far as this trade deadline?
Man, there's so many things that stood out. The one that we saw coming a mile away was that the Wizards were going to blow themselves up. We said that in the offseason.
The Celtics get trading Bol, but no. Okay, you're thinking.
No. The Wizards started out really nice. They had some good chemistry. We were questionable about how sustainable that was, but it was a group of 10 guys that really fit well. And we said, well, maybe the scouting reports just haven't caught up, whatever the case is. Well, things went south here over the last couple months. And exactly like we said, it was a bunch of guys playing for contracts. Davis Bertans, who got traded away from the Wizards to the Mavs, said as much. And they got to the deadline sitting outside of the play-in tournament and, of course, blew this thing up, which was expected. It's not expected that they moved Montrezl Harrell, who I think has very quietly, if you watch what's happened over the last couple of years with the Clippers, the Lakers, and now the Wizards, has become a locker room problem.
No, yeah, I was just about to say, like, he is an issue.
There are not a lot of people who are happy to be sharing a front line with him. There's a chip on his shoulder, and I don't know if it's about being underpaid or whatever, but so he goes to Charlotte. Can he be helpful there? He's a guy who puts up numbers, but are they empty? Are they just personal? I don't know. I'm really surprised that the Wizards are taking this swing at Porzingis. They've been dealing with injured players with John Wall, and now Brad Beal has had his issues. They're starting to try to bring in Porzingis. They got a lot of talent on that front line that they've drafted recently that they're trying to develop, whether it's Denny Avdia, Rui Hachimura, Thomas Bryant. So Kyle Kuzma's now in that mix. So where does Porzingis fit? Obviously, he has to get healthy. Yeah. Is this an insurance policy to try to get Beal to stay? Is it an insurance policy if he leaves? Is it just a flyer because the price was right? Because let's be honest.
I think it's a flyer. I think it's a flyer.
Yeah, the fact that the Mavericks were willing to give up on Porzingis, who we've heard for like a season or so that they were kind of kicking the tires and maybe weren't happy with what they got. But for Dallas to get rid of Porzingis just to get Spencer Dinwiddie, a oft-injured player, and Davis Bertans back, who, by the way, Bertans is like the Diet Coke of Kristaps Porzingis's, because he's just going to stand out there and shoot threes, and that's what Porzingis had turned into, and Porzingis supposedly didn't like that. Davis Bertans does not block shots the way that Porzingis does, but offensively fills a role that Dallas needs. Spencer Dinwiddie gives them some punch in the backcourt for a guy who's not named Jalen Brunson or Luka Doncic. That's really helpful. Dinwiddie is more of a two-way player than Tim Hardaway Jr., who they did not have to give up and they can bring off the bench. So I think it balances things out a little bit. I get why Dallas would do this. I'm just really surprised that that's all that they got back. And I was surprised that the Wizards made that trade.
Well, let me ask you about, I think, the three most interesting scenarios of this, and we're talking blow up or near blow up scenarios. First of all, Indiana blowing the ship up. Yeah. Sacramento.
Surprised they didn't move Miles Turner, but maybe that happens this offseason.
But interesting also moves made by Portland. They were very active during this trade deadline. So you want to sort of mention Tyrese Halliburton a moment ago. He's played pretty well in a couple of games since he showed up in Indiana. They haven't always won those games, but hey, that's a bigger issue, not a Tyrese Halliburton only issue. I think he had like 8 assists or something in the first quarter or something like the other night or maybe it's our first half. Anyway. So, Domantas Sabonis clearly also no longer on the Indiana Pacers. Karis LeVert, we already knew, got traded to Cleveland. Before.
Which I still think is the best deal of the whole trade deadline as far as a guy who made sense and filled a need and was at the right price and fit everything. I think the Cavaliers won the trade deadline like 3 days before it actually finished up.
So let's I guess for a moment let's first talk about the Kings and the Pacers. First of all, they meshed together in a excuse me in a deal. The Pacers traded. Okay, so the Pacers got Tyrese Halliburton, Buddy Hield, and Tristan Thompson, and in exchange traded to Sacramento, or as I see you mentioned in the text, Sacto, Domantas Sabonis, Justin Holiday, Jeremy Lamb, and a 2023 second-round pick. Thoughts on the two teams that were blowing it up a little bit together, and the fact that I hate the deal overall for either one of them. But I feel like they just traded the teams to different cities, really, to be honest with you.
We knew the Kings were going to do something. The Kings have typically shot themselves in the foot. And when this deal was first made and I saw that Sabonis was going to the Kings, I didn't see the details of the trade. I was like, what in the world? Why are they doing that? If you're in a rebuild, why is Sabonis going to the Kings? I thought maybe Sabonis to Portland was the place that I wanted him to go. Maybe Atlanta. There was a lot of different places, Toronto, that he could have wound up that would have made way more sense. Even San Antonio. But the more that I've looked at this deal, it has intrigued the crap out of me, and I've watched both Kings games that Sabonis has been there, his first two. And I have to tell you, I think the Kings, for the first time in a long time, absolutely nailed it. Just nailed it, because not only is the price right, and we'll get to that in a moment, but they made a conscious decision after having seen Tyrese Halliburton with De'Aaron Fox for a season and a half here, after seeing Buddy Hield for a handful of seasons with De'Aaron Fox, to go, look, we want Fox to stay. He's the guy we're going to build around, but neither of these guards really fit perfectly with him. We're going to change the backcourt, but more importantly, we have to get him a legit second star. We don't have a star elsewhere on this roster. Tyrese Halliburton, as much as I love him, and is a really good player, is not a star. And he's never, I don't think, going to be a multi-time all-star. Sabonis is a multi-time all-star throughout his peak, and is going to continue to be one. He is one of the best finishers around the basket, but he is also a fantastic passer. He is a good enough defender and an excellent rebounder, and he was playing out of position at power forward in Indiana with Miles Turner. You now have the perfect pick and roll guy, but also an offensive hub in Sabonis when Fox sits. The pairing there is really, really intriguing. And in the couple of games, I know that sample size is small, Sabonis has not only been the perfect target for De'Aaron Fox running the floor, but vice versa. Sabonis giving outlet passes to Fox, who's one of the speediest guys in the league, to get down court. Sabonis being able to open up the offense for a guy like Chimezie Metu, who's a fantastic backdoor cutter and finisher above the rim. Harrison Barnes to be able to spot up. I like that they got Dante DiVincenzo, who's a bigger, more traditional shooting guard. He's a floor stretcher like Buddy Hield is, but DiVincenzo can actually defend a little bit, which Hield absolutely cannot. This opens the door for Davion Mitchell to take the backup point guard minutes and shooting guard minutes. Davion Mitchell is a much better defender than offensive player, but he will grow. It just makes sense. Sacramento, rather than going, hey, let's rebuild again, got rid of a locker room guy that wasn't working in Marvin Bagley, who they sent to Detroit. They shuffled things and told their star, look, we not only want to make the play-in tournament this year, but we have a foundation to build around. And they did not give up key long-term pieces. They wanted to get rid of Hield. Halliburton's a good player. I think it's fine that Indiana wants to take a look at him and maybe see if they can build around him. But I'm going to say this about Tyrese Halliburton. He is going to be a very good player on some very good teams. He might make an all-star game or two during his career. But he is a guy who came in and was touted to be NBA ready, turned out to be more NBA ready than we thought, and I think he hit his ceiling already in his first year. And he's going to be solid throughout, but I see like a rich man's George Hill. Coaches are going to love him. Teammates are going to love him. He is not necessarily a cornerstone, but he's a guy who's going to be a solid starter. And you just got rid of a building block in Sabonis. I cannot for the life of me understand how that was the best deal the Pacers could get for Domantas Sabonis. And again, I don't hate Halliburton. Hield, I don't know if he's a long-term fit there. Hield is just a gunner at this point. He's a J.R. Smith, Jamal Crawford, Lou Williams type of guy who there's definitely a role for in the league, but that's not a key like top three guy, and he's on a fairly big contract. So kudos to the Sacramento Kings. This made a ton of sense. Indiana is now a team in full milieu and transition, and we don't know what's going on there.
Look at Joel C. Cordes using words that I'm going to have to Google in a minute. Am I going to have to Google that?
Halliburton and Malcolm Brogdon can play together in the same backcourt. If Brogdon ever gets healthy, Halliburton can play in the backcourt with a lot of different people. And he could have done it with De'Aaron Fox. But again, he's not the running partner that's the bonuses, or the guy that, you know, when De'Aaron Fox sits is going to be your star. They had tried that. It was proven he couldn't hold that.
Let me ask you about Portland then. Portland traded C.J. McCollum, Tony Snell, and Larry Nance Jr. They send them off to New Orleans. Sorry, I said right? Yeah, I said
to
that
the
right.
Pelicans.
They send them off to New Orleans. The Portland Trailblazers in exchange got Josh Hart and Nickeil Alexander-Walker, some picks, blah, blah, blah. What do you think of what Portland's doing? That's what I'm most interested in. What do you think of what Portland's doing with this roster right now?
I don't know what they're doing yet, but if I'm Damian Lillard,
You want to go answers?
I took my surgery already, and I'm starting to check about my options with my agent, because they're clearly reshuffling the deck, but not in a tangible way that's any different than how they reshuffled the deck this offseason, and it didn't work. You got rid of Lillard's running mate in McCollum, who, yeah, I think they'd probably gone as far as they can go. CJ is a great offensive player who is defensively challenged and slightly undersized for his position. That would not be such a problem if Damian Lillard wasn't the exact same body type with the exact same limitations. Lillard obviously is the better player. So it was right that you keep Lillard and move McCollum. But you didn't get back a player who was equivalent. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who was arguably the best prospect that you got out of this, you moved. You know, he went to the Utah Jazz. I was floored that the Jazz moved Joe Ingles, because Joe Ingles is a Jazz guy through and through. And for them to move him while he's hurt, I mean, they had to do it because they have to do something. They were on a losing streak, and Alexander Walker is very clearly signaling that the Mike Conley era is going to end sooner rather than later in Utah. and Alexander Walker plus Donovan Mitchell plus Jordan Clarkson as your 3-group rotation with, maybe Conley on a much smaller veteran deal moving into the background, I really like that. But back to Portland, okay, your main building block here is Damian Lillard and Yusuf Nurkic, and you get Joe Ingles maybe next season, who is a really solid glue guy. Josh Hart, I love. Josh Hart to me is very similar to what you have in Tyrese Halliburton. And Hart's not as good of a player, but he just does the right things. He does a little bit of everything, but that does not move the needle. Portland's not going anywhere until they really blow this up and decide who they're going to build around. And it's going to be Anthony Simons, and it's going to be whatever other young guys they get back. So yeah, this is delaying the inevitable. If Portland had been able to,
they'd already
land
moved
Sabonis,
Powell and Covington too.
They're moving the money and clearing the deck.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we ever see Lillard in a Blazers uniform again. If his heart truly is in Portland as he says it is, then he makes it to next year's trade deadline. And they're not doing well by that point and they move him. But I think he's probably gone this offseason and the full teardown happens. I was surprised that Nurkic stayed. If Portland had been able to bring in Sabonis or another guy of that caliber, that would have signaled to me, okay, Dame, we're getting you a different running mate. Let's see how this goes. But the fact that they couldn't and didn't, I don't have any emotion about what they did at this trade deadline because it's so all over the place and deck shuffling that we don't know what the end game is here, but it's not definitively good.
That's true. There's one other team I was really interested in asking you about, and that's a team that's really hot right now, and that's Boston. Boston has played, not jokingly, but in all seriousness, it's best basketball in a year.
Mm-hmm.
They are on a huge hot streak. Their defense is just ferocious. They gave up, I think, 32 points last Friday night in the first quarter to who it doesn't really matter at this point. But then it looked like they were about to get trounced, and then they just shut them down the rest of the way. This is a team that can turn it on and has often turned it on. They're one of the best defensive teams, obviously, in the league. We talked about them. Well, they get rid of
recently.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Well, did recently. They got rid of their entire bench. It felt for very few players. But it seemed like a bunch of picks. Josh Richardson's no longer a part of that team. Romeo Langford's not on that team. One of the guys they did get is the guy Derek White from the Spurs, who has played pretty well in his first, I think, 2 games with the Celtics since. But he comes from the Greg Popovich tree, where it seems like he makes the smart right plays. He's a really good defender.
He's an Olympic gold medalist.
Yes, also an Olympic gold medalist. Yeah. He's a kind of it feels like for a not a very loud, splashy move for Boston. They're undoing a lot of what Danny Ainge did as far as the draft picks recently, trying to acquire a few more for maybe some pieces this offseason to make some big moves if they want to, try this offseason. But for a very quiet trade deadline, except for just guys moving and not getting a whole bunch of name back, Derek White's a pretty good piece to get back that fits the mold of what this team is.
I love that aspect of it. We were talking about maybe it was time to move on from Jaylen Brown. They obviously decided they're not ready to do that yet. So if you're going to do that, then you're going to hang your hat on what you're doing well. And it's only been recently that the Celtics have really discovered that, hey, defense can be our identity. Some of this, of course, is the fact that guys have been healthy. Brown and Tatum both had their injury issues, especially Brown. Early on in the season, Marcus Smart missed some time. So we can't overlook the fact that health is a major aspect of this, of them finally coming together. But the Celtics for a long time during the Danny Ainge era were overstocked at certain positions. Guys that they had drafted because, to Ainge's credit, he had amassed so many picks that he had been bringing guys in, and it felt like they all needed some time, and they would show some flashes to justify some playing time, but it was always like an 11-man rotation, 12-man rotation, and a bunch of guys where you're like, okay, I think he should play, but every time I see him play, I think somebody else should play on the bench. And They consolidated. They balanced things out. They said Peyton Pritchard is our backup point guard, but Derek White has played some point guard minutes in San Antonio before.
Mhm.
We've got 3 very good defenders already in Robert Williams III, Marcus Smart, and Jaylen Brown. We're going to add another one in Derek White. Al Horford is still a plus defender. Grant Williams can do some good things on the defensive end. Derek White, I think, is an excellent fit for them defensively. He's not the shooter that Josh Richardson was, but Richardson, let's be honest, has been a replacement level player who shot the 3 ball well this season. And Derek White is more athletic. I just think he fits so much better there. And then way under the radar, just like the Celtics brought Al Horford back because they went, that was a veteran who fit and people liked him. And we've had some locker room issues. So let's get Al back in the mix here. And Horford has done very well for them this season. They bring back Daniel Tice from the Houston Rockets, right, who Tice left the Celtics to go get his money, which he had earned playing some very good starter and backup minutes with Boston. Now he got his money and the Celtics bring him back. And I love that because he fit in that locker room with them. It seemed like everybody liked him. He was a gritty type of guy, skilled enough on the offensive end, can play a little bit of the 4 or the 5. He's at a point where he can be that backup to Robert Williams, but slot in as a starting small or power forward if Al Horford gets hurt. And the roster just makes a lot more sense. So kudos to the Celtics for finally finding some momentum within themselves and building on that and prolonging this Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum experiment. I don't know if this moves them up into like the top 5 in the East, but I think it makes them a lot more dangerous and it gives them a lot more of an identity than they had before.
They're now in the playoffs. They're now in like the regular playoffs. And who knows? I mean, as a top... Who knows how New Philadelphia and New Brooklyn are going to look, and how good Karis LeVert and the Cavs are going to be in the back end of the season. Like there's a lot of who knows. I mean, it could be anybody's game in the last 30 games or so of the season.
I look at the Celtics now, and they went from a team that was perennially 12 to 13 deep with way too many backup quarterbacks to now being a legit 10 deep, and I am totally fine with that because the 10. Yeah. The 10 makes so much more sense than the 12 who were there before this.
Well, it's like in basketball, like in Kentucky, for example, like they only play like 7 guys, total, right? I mean, you get like 12 to fill out the roster and stuff, but like you don't see the other guys. The vast majority of the minutes they go 7 deep. Like you don't need 12 deep in the NBA. Like that's most championship level teams aren't playing 12 guys to that many significant minutes. Let me ask you this. How interesting was it that in that Daniel Tice deal that not only do the Celtics get rid of a couple of bench players, but there goes Dennis Schroeder, the guy who gave up $100 million contract, was on a 1-year sort of prove-it deal for very cheap money, and now he's playing for stats and trying to get some money back in his offseason, all because he bet on himself and clearly so far has lost that. And he goes to Houston. He goes to Houston where, like, I don't know who's going to see him the rest of the year.
Right. It's unfortunate for Dennis Schroeder because look at that cautionary tale of Nerlens Noel, who got offered that huge contract, bet on himself. And we have seen cases where guys bet on themselves and it paid off, right? And they made way more money in the long run. But Noel hasn't touched that and has been a career backup since then. A very solid career backup, but he'll never get that money back. Dennis Schroeder's never going to get that money back. Schroeder is not a starting point guard in the NBA. He is a very, very solid spark plug type of backup point guard who you won't lose sleep at night if your starter gets hurt for 10 games and Schroeder's got to take over for a bit. But that was the role he played in Atlanta at the beginning of his career. Yeah. And Jeff Teague was in front of him and Schroeder did some good things. And eventually Jeff Teague, as he aged out and Schroeder was really making it known that he wanted to be the starter, got that opportunity, but didn't light the world on fire. But there was still the upside tag and that contract was offered and he didn't take it. Dennis Schroeder to me is just an updated version of what Reggie Jackson was. You think of Reggie Jackson with the Oklahoma City Thunder. Really solid backup, long arms, spark plug player for a really good team that had Harden and Westbrook and Durant. And you're like, oh man, and they got Reggie Jackson in that backcourt too. That's phenomenal. And Jackson wanted to be a starter so badly that he forced his way out, wound up with the Detroit Pistons. They gave him his bag. He became that starter. And what? He was overrated for the rest of that time. And now he's gone back. You know, he bounced around a little bit. The Clippers gave him a lifeline. To his credit, Reggie Jackson had played very solid minutes there for the Clippers. But is Reggie Jackson the star that we thought he was going to, that he thought he was going to be?
Right.
No.
Hey, but listen, hey, go get your bag, man. If you can't find, like,
I agree with that. Go get
that's
your money.
why I would have, if Dennis Schroeder was my client, I would have said, please get your bag. Don't go out in this free agent market. I don't think you're getting triple digits. In fact, he wasn't even getting multi-year offers. Like, from what I could tell, like they were in the. Yeah, like,
can you not bet on yourself also to go, I'm going to get the 80 million or whatever it is and play for that next contract and make that next one 120 million instead of going, I'm going to go 1 year because I want 120 million now? In a way, are you betting against yourself to go, I don't know if I can get 120 million 3 years from now. I need to get it now. Like, there's logic either way about what's really betting on yourself and what actually is like some self-doubt there. And I'm not in these guys' heads. I mean, they're grown men and they're businessmen and they're going to make that decision. But
Joel, he would have been 30 at the end of that contract.
Yeah.
That we're talking about. Like, if he had just taken the big bucks now, 30, 31. That's a lot of basketball still left, and you could still get $150 million for a deal if you took that money and you were still playing that. But, you know, listen, this is what happens. And now you get to go keep being teammates with Enes Freedom. In Houston, I also had read a bunch of things where like he wasn't exactly a good locker room guy either. Like he was just not a fit.
And that's been unfortunately the MO for Schroeder in multiple places. Basically everywhere he's been, it's been kind of questionable. And there's been that stat hoggy kind of aspect to all this. That was also the same thing with Reggie Jackson too. And now that's changed in LA, but he kind of had to be humbled by almost being out of the league.
Yeah, but also like I get why Boston you would want to make a deal like that. There's a bunch of points on that guy's arms. You could probably, sort of give it a shot, right? Like it's worth a shot, and you could trade him. I think it was after like December 15th. You could start figuring out what that was, especially since you were paying him like $30. Like it was super cheap deal for something like that. But it's a guy that clearly was pissed off because he didn't get the kind of contract he wanted. The kind of guy set up clearly just to go stat hogging to try to prove this season that in this offseason he would be worth that $120 million or whatever he wanted. And that's just not how this Boston team was going to succeed.
And in the end, Peyton Pritchard won the backup point guard position over Dennis Schroeder. And as Schroeder's minutes declined, the Celtics played better. Like, I don't want to pin all this on Schroeder. And
no. But
I hope Schroeder gets as much money as he possibly can during his career. You wish that for everybody. But let's be real here. Like, it ain't coming back. And what he is in the league is still incredibly nebulous. And now he's getting old enough that becomes scary.
Yeah, like I don't know. I don't know what his place is going to be on this Houston team, right? Like we don't talk a lot about the Houston, the Rockets, and for obvious reasons. But like, I mean, he's on a 1-year deal, right? Like like it's not an expensive contract. You just sort of play him out, see what happens. But like, I don't know if he's got a spot on this Houston team. I don't even think unless something changes. I don't know if Houston's going to be one of the suitors in the offseason. I'd be doubtful of that.
I know we're tight on time, so I just want to give a couple shout outs to a few teams that made some moves under the radar. We talked about at the top, it was surprising that Atlanta, that Chicago, that the Lakers,
I'm not surprised about Chicago. Like I think Chicago, and I think Chicago is the least surprising of those. Actually, the Knicks will be the least surprising of those because Tibbs just thinks he can win with whatever box of crayons he has. But Atlanta did surprise me because I thought Atlanta was like he started to figure himself out, started to play a lot better, and was like they were the only team until a couple nights, like last night. They were the only team that had beaten Boston during this like 10-game winning streak or 9 or 10-game winning streak that they had. So, I mean, they started to figure, but they didn't make any moves, and that also surprised me.
Yeah, Miami usually is kind of active at the deadline, at least adding a guy, and they didn't do that. But I want to give a shout out to the two defending conference champs for going under the radar and just shoring up some things. Phoenix very quietly gets Aaron Holiday for a second round pick, little point guard insurance there behind Chris Paul, defensive guy who's got a lot left to learn, but some depth. They bring back Torrey Craig, who got some money to go to the Pacers, and Craig was a very key rotation guy for the Suns during that run. And we've been looking at the Suns going, all right, we know they're good. What's their depth like? And they keep answering that question. But to just quietly add a couple more depth guys to now where you go, all right, yep, they're 10 deep and they got some insulation behind that. They're good. They're ready for their playoff run. They're 4 games ahead in the Western Conference for number 1. And then the Bucks, the defending champs, this deal looks worse because Pat Connaughton promptly breaks his hand and is going to be out for a little bit. But to move Donte DiVincenzo and to get Serge Ibaka tells a couple things. One, it says they're not sure if Brook Lopez is going to be healthy this season. He injured his back in that second game of the year, has not been back since. Serge Ibaka is a guy who, his best days are way behind him, but he's played in a couple of NBA finals. He is an NBA champion. You can play him as a center. You could conceivably play him a little bit at the 4, but it's just some insulation. That means Bobby Portis is not the only guy you trust up at the 5. And again, Milwaukee did not have to make a whole lot happen in order to get Ibaka. Donte DiVincenzo was a very solid player for them. And like I said, I love him in Sacramento. He's probably going to be better off there than in Milwaukee anyway. The deal doesn't look great with Connaughton getting hurt, and now the Bucks are going to have to scramble maybe for a buyout guy just to fill the wing. It's rumored that they're looking for Goran Dragic hard after the Spurs trade for Dragic. They move Thad Young over to the Raptors. Dragic gets bought out, so the Bucks probably try to get Goran. But Grayson Allen, let's be real, had won that starting job in Milwaukee while DiVincenzo was hurt, and probably fits better with them as a two-way player. But both of those teams,
won the job in between tripping guys and knocking them down in the middle of shots. Yeah, that's tough.
He won the job doing Grayson Allen things. And
one of those instigator guys, like he's like, why is this guy such a pain in my butt? I don't understand. Like, why is it this guy? But
I loved that they didn't do too much. And like I said at the top of the show, I loved that Cleveland addressed that need and went, we do think we're pretty good, and we don't think it's a fluke that we're in the 4th seed. Now they're sitting up in the 3rd, and to go, all right, we're here ahead of schedule, but we're going to take our shot. And the Suns were ahead of schedule last year too, and took their shots and went a lot further than expected. And the Grizzlies are doing the same thing out west.
And I talk about all the time how, like, if you've got that shot this year, take it. But Cleveland says, hey, we got a shot this year, but we know we're not supposed to be here right now. We could still try to make moves to improve ourselves, but we can't sacrifice the core
right.
and
LeVert
the
fits long term, like we talked about last week. That's what's so great about that deal is he fits the vision and overall. And I do think it sends the right message to your young guys. So if you're Darius Garland or Evan Mobley, and you're with a franchise that outside of LeBron and way back in the 80s with Mark Price and Brad Daugherty it's been a sad sack franchise. But for them to go, look, we're good now, and we're going to take that seriously, and we're going to try to give you the tools to build this team. I think it is the same thing that the Sacramento Kings have said to De'Aaron Fox to go, look, we're going to get you a legit running mate. And yes, we're the Kings and we suck, and we've sucked for a long time. But dude, we're trying, and we're gonna capitalize on this. It's the same thing the Grizzlies have done around Ja. Like,
you gotta feel
that's
so
the right
good
message.
if you're De'Aaron Fox right now, right? Like
you give it another shot. It buys at least 2 more years before you say the Kings are going to king, and I don't want to be one anymore.
Yeah, but they could have sent you someone. They could have said, listen, let's just get as much as we can. And they said, we think you're our guy. We think you're our kingpin here that can be the piece that we build around. Let's see if we can find something to complement you and start finding pieces that work to build to make Sacramento a playoff contender again. And I do appreciate that. If you could just briefly we addressed them briefly before, mockingly so. But the fact that the Lakers literally said we're going to look to the buyout market for where our help is. It says one, Russ Westbrook stays at least for right now, which
because you couldn't find a deal.
I was about to say because that was the guy that everyone was saying we got to move him, but clearly they couldn't move him. And clearly that was going to be the big piece that they were going to be able to move to get any kind of wiggle room and to make a big change on this roster. So the Lakers, fresh off of blowing a lead late against Golden State, not the first time they've done that. They'll probably keep doing it the rest of the year. 500 at best this year. The fact that they're going straight to the buyout market, despite all of the discussion around what LeBron James probably wanted to do with this roster and to make some kind of overhauls. The fact they couldn't find any suitors to make the changes they wanted to, and now it's buyout market to try to piece something together for the final stretch.
And I think the frustration is going to mount. I think you're going to see a lot of guys who are looking towards the door because there are a ton of expiring contracts on this deal or on this roster, and the way that this team is underachieved, you're going to see most of the supporting cast gone this offseason. They're going to be the scapegoats, right or wrong, for the fact that this didn't work around LA's big three. So you're going to have guys playing for their next contract. Name me the last time that somebody on the buyout market was a season saver and that big of a needle mover. It doesn't really happen or exist. And if it did, it was a once in a lifetime type of thing. That guy ain't walking through this door.
There's a reason they're on the buyout market.
LA still could be semi-dangerous with the right matchup. They could. But they got to get out of the play-in tournament first. And I just think that chemistry-wise, it hasn't been there. I think not only do you go into this next offseason saying, we're going to reshuffle this entire deck and rethink all of this. Maybe a couple of the young guys like Malik Monk, Talen Horton-Tucker, Austin Reeves, maybe a couple of those guys stick around Kendrick Nunn, and you see what you can build with them because you need cheap youngsters to grow. But I also think like LA might look at this and go, we're going to force LeBron's hand here. Are we really going to build around him when this is an Anthony Davis team? We're not going to move Anthony Davis at this time and try to build around LeBron solely. We can't build around Russell Westbrook. He's here. It's a sunk cost.
But can you build around a 700-year-old LeBron, or can you build around a 700 as far as how his legs and are concerned? Anthony Davis, who's often injured, like
you take your shot around Davis every time for now
because of the possible upside when he does play.
Yeah, and you LeBron keeps signing the 1-year deals, 2-year deals,
and we're talking about building like 2 or 3 years at a time, like 1 year at a time. I don't. That's the thing. I don't know. Like I don't know what this. I feel like the Lakers are in a very precarious position right now. Mm-hmm. And
if he wants his money to come back, then you allow that because you're here to sell tickets and it's LeBron. If he wants the money, then he's got to understand that this is going to be the swan song of his career success-wise. If he wants the money but wants you to make
still playing really well too.
Yeah,
I mean, it's so weird. Like it's so weird that this team is like, I don't know. Go ahead. Sorry.
This may just force the hand where LeBron starts to look elsewhere at other options. I wouldn't be surprised, and I called this. Like, I don't think it's this season yet, but maybe next offseason LeBron retires and does a Jordan retirement where he's out for a season or two to recharge his body, waiting for Bronny to get drafted, and then comes back and, plays a role on whatever team, because that way he has flexibility. Like, you can't force Bronny to wind up in LA, although we've seen crazier things happen in the NBA and conspiracy theories and all that sort of thing. But like, I think this era is coming to an end, and Russell Westbrook wound up being the nail in the coffin. But there was other underlying factors there that, made this happen. And one of them is age, and it's LeBron's age too. But this is not an easy fix, and it's going to be a painful fix. The Lakers are not going to win with this current big three a title ever again. It's not going to happen.
I can't disagree with you, right? Like last year was sort of the thought, like, hey, just get healthy, get to the playoffs. They're fine. And then you saw how mismatched they are with
Mm-hmm.
some of the elite teams that are in the West.
Young teams, the hungry teams, the athletic teams.
And I was going to say, like, in Phoenix was sort of the team you're like, they're young. Young teams in the NBA don't usually win. And then they just raced them. They just raced them out of the playoffs. And you're like, oh, it's going to be like that, huh? Yeah, that was sort of like the first inkling in my head where I was like, this may not work. I mean, they got the one championship in the bubble, but like.
And what did they do? They got older, more experienced. There was better balance on this roster. I mean, on paper, the guys that they brought in, there was better balance on this roster than there was last season. And I actually thought better, well, I don't know if better balance than 2 years ago. The one issue was, though, they did not have any defensive specialists. We called that at the beginning of the year. Offensively, we thought they were going to be fine, and there was decent balance there. But who was going to be the stopper? That has been the problem all year long. And a lot of these guys who, can still hit a shot and be helpful offensively, aged even worse defensively. And we thought maybe the collective knowledge, the zeitgeist of all of these great players together would have given them kind of that one last stand defensively where they were able to put something together on their pride and their know-how. And that did not happen in the least bit.
All right, Joel, call your shot, and then we'll get out of here. For the Lakers, right now they are 9th in the West. They are 26-31, 20 and a half games out of first place. They're not making first place. But what's important is they're also 5.5 out of being securely in the playoffs. And it's the top 10 that, or the 7 through 10 that make it to the play-in, right?
Yep.
They are
3 games up on Portland in 10th and 3.5 on New Orleans.
Yeah, Joel, you try to show off with your math there. Okay, I get you, son. I'm
just trying to help you out, brother. It's Valentine's Day.
Thank you, sweetie. Be mine. Do the Lakers make the play-in, and B, can they win past the play-in?
I think it's a better chance that they make the play-in than the Clippers as far as surviving. I think it's a better chance that they make the play-in than the Trailblazers as far as surviving.
The Pelicans, though.
The Pelicans and getting CJ McCollum, we didn't talk much about that. We'll monitor that situation. If Zion comes back, it's an interesting 3 with McCollum and Ingram and
But
Zion.
We're just talking about possibly knocking the Lakers out, not doing anything else.
I love the momentum that the Kings can grab from this. I don't believe in the Spurs. Pelicans is kind of a coin toss about whether they can do this or not. But again, I would rather... I see it as more likely that the Clippers ultimately get bumped and the Blazers. I think the Lakers do make it. Again, matchup is going to mean everything about whether they get out of that play-in tournament. I don't think they ultimately do. I think they win one play-in game, and that's the end of it.
And they get to the play-in finals.
But I don't see the Lakers beating Minnesota in a final play-in game. I don't see them beating Denver or Dallas or Utah if it finally comes down to that. Like, there are some good teams that are going to be sitting in that 7th seed that the Lakers are just not as good as. So if they're able to win a game and get to that round or win 2 games, whatever it takes, but when they have to get out of the play-in tournament, that's where I just don't see that happening. Unless you get, like, again, a last stand type of thing from LeBron.
Yeah, it's going to take LeBron and AD both being healthy in the play-in tournament.
Last question for me, and I know we're going long. Who has the better, or I guess worse chance of falling out of the playoffs entirely? The Lakers, who we just talked about, or the Brooklyn Nets, who are sitting at 8th in the East?
I'm going to say it's like 55-45 right now. It's still the Lakers.
Okay.
Because I think the Lakers are missed. There is hope returning for the Nets. I mean, Kevin Durant hope. Ben Simmons could be what he was, peak Ben Simmons when he was in Philadelphia.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be just a better fit as far as personalities that when Kyrie's actually on the court that would work. Plus, as you mentioned, like, you know, it's no small task having like Andre Drummond as a part of that deal to come to you too. And who am I missing on that was part of that piece? Seth Curry, to be able to come in and be a part of that. So I like the Nets a lot. I think the Nets still are a dangerous enough team to maybe challenge for that 4th seed. Maybe.
Depends on when KD gets back, right? So much depends on it.
Yeah, and there was already so much stress put on KD just to sort of keep the team afloat. But again, they were number one. Like they
Mm-hmm.
were the best team, even when James Harden was struggling to get his shot early in the season, when Kyrie Irving was not a part of this team by any stretch of the imagination. I mean,
And let's be real here.
KD's the man, like when he's healthy. But like this is another one of those injuries that we got to worry about too.
Let's be real here. We've thought Miami was going to be scary before. Sometimes they really are. Sometimes they aren't. The Bulls, I don't think scare somebody in a 7-game series because
I
of
don't think
the
they scare
injury
anybody.
issues.
No, despite the fact that DeMar DeRozan's going for like 50 a night in the last 2 weeks.
Cleveland is young, that they're scary on a game-by-game basis, but in a 7-game series, we're going to give them the same doubt that we gave the Suns and some of these other young teams until they prove otherwise. Philly, we don't know what they have there. We really don't know how that works. Boston improved, a threat, but not a championship threat until proven otherwise. So you're really looking at like Miami and Milwaukee as the two teams where, like, if you're Brooklyn, we're like, I really do not want a series with them, and I would rather not have a series with Philadelphia. But if fully healthy, I mean, I'm not losing sleep if I'm Brooklyn, except for like 2 matchups in the playoffs, and the rest of them going healthy. I like our chances.
Look, and they weren't even completely healthy, and they almost an inch and a half of a foot of Kevin Durant. They beat Brooklyn. I mean, they beat Milwaukee last year.
Yeah.
So, all right. Joel C. Cordes, thank you for your time, sir. Where will people find us on this video if they want to sit through this 1 hour and 16-minute plus fiasco that I lovingly call basketball by association?
YouTube is where you should like, share, subscribe for the video version. Spreaker, Spotify, iTunes is the audio version. And a happy Valentine's Day to everybody out there. Get your bag.
Keep your pants. Keep it in your pants, guys. Keep it in your pants.